When my father screamed that I was dead to him and slammed the door in my face, I thought my wedding day was ruined. But 3 months later, when Harrison Ford himself walked me down that aisle, my father's jaw hit the floor so hard I thought he'd need surgery. You won't believe how I pulled this off. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Rachel Martinez, and this story begins in the cramped break room of Brookside Elementary School in Phoenix, Arizona, where I'd been teaching third grade for 6 years. It was a Tuesday in March when my phone buzzed with a text that would change everything. "Can we talk tonight? Something important. Mom." Those 4 words sent ice through my veins. In our family, something important usually meant bad news wrapped in careful words and delivered with Mom's famous chocolate chip cookies as an emotional buffer. I arrived at my childhood home on Maple Street that evening, the same house where I'd scraped my knees learning to ride a bike and where Dad had taught me to throw a perfect spiral in the backyard. The living room felt different somehow, charged with a tension I couldn't place. Dad sat in his worn leather recliner, the one positioned perfectly to see his prized movie poster collection covering the entire west wall. Raiders of the Lost Ark held the center spot, signed by Harrison Ford himself, Dad's most treasured possession from his days working security at movie premieres in Los Angeles. Mom emerged from the kitchen carrying that telltale plate of cookies, her smile too bright, too forced. "Rachel, honey, sit down." "What's going on?" I asked, though part of me already knew. The way Dad wouldn't meet my eyes, how Mom's hands trembled slightly as she set down the plate, I'd seen this dance before. "Your father and I are getting divorced." The words hung in the air like smoke. 28 years of marriage, countless family barbecues, anniversary dinners, Christmas mornings, all of it dissolving into legal paperwork and divided belongings. "It's for the best," Dad finally spoke, his voice gruff. "We've grown apart. I want different things." I spent the next 2 hours listening to the careful explanations, the assurances that it wasn't my fault, the promises that nothing would change between us. But everything had already changed. The family I'd known, the foundation I'd built my life on, was crumbling beneath my feet. 3 weeks later, I met David Chen at a coffee shop downtown. He was a graphic designer with kind eyes and an easy laugh, recently moved to Phoenix from Seattle. We struck up a conversation over our shared love of terrible sci-fi movies, and somehow that first coffee turned into dinner, then weekend hikes through South Mountain, then quiet evenings cooking together in his apartment. David was everything I hadn't known I was looking for: patient where others had been demanding, supportive where others had been dismissive. He listened when I talked about my students, celebrated my small victories, and held me when the divorce proceedings got particularly ugly. 6 months into our relationship, David proposed during a sunset hike at Camelback Mountain. It wasn't elaborate or showy, just him, me, and a simple platinum band as the Arizona sky turned purple and gold around us. I said yes before he'd finished asking. The next morning, I drove to Dad's new apartment complex across town, a sterile place called Desert Vista that smelled like fresh paint and broken dreams. I found him in his cramped living room, surrounded by boxes he still hadn't unpacked. The Harrison Ford poster had made it onto the wall, but it looked lonely without its collection companions. "Dad, I have news." I held out my left hand, the engagement ring catching the morning light streaming through his blinds. He looked at the ring, then at me, then back at the ring. "Who is he?" "His name is David Chen. He's a graphic designer, he's kind, he makes me laugh, and I love him." "Chen?" Dad's voice went flat. "Chinese?" "His grandparents immigrated from Taiwan, but Dad, what does that—" "No." He stood up abruptly, his face hardening in a way I'd never seen before. "No daughter of mine is marrying outside our culture. I didn't raise you to throw away everything we are." The words hit me like a physical blow. Everything we are? Dad, you taught me that people should be judged by their character, not their— I taught you to respect your family, your heritage. This David, he'll never understand us. Your children won't know who they are. Our children will know they're loved. That's what matters.
Dad's laugh was bitter, cold. Love? You think love conquers all? You're living in a fairy tale, Rachel. Marriage is hard enough without adding cultural differences, language barriers, and different religions.
David speaks perfect English, and we've talked about all of this. We want the same things: a family, a home, careers we're passionate about. Isn't that enough? It's not enough. Dad's voice rose to a shout. I won't stand by and watch you make the biggest mistake of your life. If you marry this man, you're no daughter of mine. You'll be dead to me. The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at this man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who cheered at every school play, who'd held me when boys broke my heart. This stranger was wearing my father's face. Dad, please, you don't mean that. I've never meant anything more in my life. Choose, Rachel, him or your family. I looked around his half-empty apartment, at the boxes of a life dismantled, at the movie posters that had once brought him so much joy, now hanging crooked on unfamiliar walls. This wasn't the father who'd raised me. This was a man scared and angry and lashing out at the easiest target. I choose David, I whispered. Dad turned his back to me. Then you're dead to me. Get out. I drove home in a daze, David's worried face greeting me at the door. Through tears, I told him everything. He held me while I sobbed, then quietly suggested we postpone the wedding. No, I said, wiping my eyes. I won't let his fear ruin our happiness. We're getting married in October as planned. The next few months passed in a blur of wedding preparations tinged with sadness. Mom tried to play mediator, begging Dad to reconsider, but he'd built a wall around his heart that no amount of pleading could breach. My older brother Marcus flew in from Denver, torn between loyalty to Dad and support for me. He's being an ass, Marcus said over dinner one night, but he's our ass. This is killing him, Rachel. He just doesn't know how to admit he's wrong. Then he should apologize and meet David, really meet him, not just judge him from across a room. You know, Dad, pride's always been his weakness. 2 months before the wedding, I realized Dad's absence would leave a gaping hole in our ceremony. Who would walk me down the aisle? Mom offered, as did Marcus, but neither felt right. This was supposed to be Dad's moment, his last official act as the most important man in my life, before handing that role to David. I was wallowing in self-pity when inspiration struck in the most unlikely place, a late-night viewing of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. As Harrison Ford's weathered face filled the screen, fighting for family and doing what's right despite the cost, an absolutely crazy idea began to form. Dad had met Harrison Ford exactly once, at a movie premiere in 1994 when Dad was working security for the event. Ford had been gracious, signing the poster and chatting for a few minutes about Dad's military service. That brief encounter had become the stuff of family legend, retold at every holiday gathering for 25 years. What if I could somehow get Harrison Ford to walk me down the aisle? The sheer audacity of it made me laugh out loud, startling David awake beside me. "What's so funny?" he mumbled. "I'm going to get Harrison Ford to walk me down the aisle at our wedding." David sat up, suddenly alert. "Rachel, I love your optimism, but no, hear me out. Dad worships the man. If anyone could crack that wall he's built around his heart, it's Han Solo himself. Honey, Harrison Ford doesn't even know you exist. He's probably booked solid for the next 5 years. Maybe, but what's the worst that could happen? He says no?" David studied my face in the dim light. "You're serious about this?" "Dead serious." "Dad thinks I'm living in a fairy tale? Fine, let's give him a fairy tale he'll never forget." The next morning, I began what would become the most intensive campaign of my life. I researched Ford's representation, his production company, and his charitable interests. I crafted letter after letter, each one more heartfelt than the last, explaining the situation and my impossible request. I sent emails to his publicist, his agent, his manager. I wrote to the Ford Family Foundation, hoping his philanthropic side might be moved by the story. I even tried reaching out through his co-stars from various movies, thinking a personal connection might help. Days turned into weeks, with nothing but automated responses and polite rejections.
Mr. Ford appreciates your interest, but is unable to accommodate personal requests due to his demanding schedule.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I was about to give up when I remembered something Mom had mentioned weeks earlier. Her book club friend Janet had a daughter who worked in Hollywood as a script supervisor. It was a long shot, but I was running out of ammunition. Janet's daughter Kelly turned out to be a godsend. She'd worked on several films and knew people who might know Harrison Ford. More importantly, she understood the desperation behind my request. "This is either the most romantic thing I've ever heard or completely insane," Kelly said during our phone call. "But you know what? I've got a contact who works with Ford's production company. Let me see what I can do." A week later, my phone rang at 11 p.m. "Rachel, this is Kelly. Are you sitting down?" My heart stopped. What happened? "Harrison Ford wants to talk to you tomorrow. He's in Phoenix for a private event, and he's got an hour free at 2 p.m. I'm texting you the address now." I stared at the phone long after she hung up, David watching me with concern and growing excitement. "Well?" he asked. "I have a meeting with Han Solo tomorrow afternoon." The next day, I stood outside the Four Seasons Hotel in Scottsdale, wearing my best professional outfit and carrying a folder with photos of Dad, copies of my letters, and a written timeline of everything that had happened. My hands shook as I approached the front desk. "I'm Rachel Martinez. I have a meeting with Harrison Ford." The desk clerk made a phone call, then directed me to a private conference room on the second floor. I climbed those stairs feeling like I was ascending to meet a deity. Harrison Ford was smaller than I'd expected, more weathered, but his eyes held the same intelligence and warmth I'd seen on screen for decades. He stood when I entered, extending his hand with a firm grip. "Ms. Martinez, I understand you have quite a story to tell." For the next 45 minutes, I laid out everything: Dad's divorce, our relationship, the engagement, the disownment, the wedding plans. Ford listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions or requesting to see photos. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me with those famous eyes. "Your father sounds like a stubborn man." The stubbornness, but he's also the man who taught me to stand up for what I believe in. The irony isn't lost on me. Ford smiled at that. "And you believe getting a washed-up actor to walk you down the aisle will change his mind?" "I believe my father raised a daughter who doesn't give up on the people she loves, even when they give up on her." He was quiet for a long moment, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small notebook, scribbling something quickly. "October 15th, you said. What time?" My heart hammered against my ribs as Harrison Ford wrote in his notebook. This couldn't be happening. Movie stars didn't just agree to walk random strangers down wedding aisles, especially not strangers who'd ambush them with sob stories about stubborn fathers. "For Loxie's ceremony at Desert Botanical Garden," he said, still writing. "I assume you'll need me there by 3:30 for photos." I blinked rapidly, wondering if the Arizona heat had finally gotten to me. You're actually going to do this?" Ford closed the notebook and slipped it back into his jacket. "I've got a daughter about your age. If she were in your situation, I'd hope someone would help her out." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "But I have conditions." "Anything, name it." "First, this stays completely confidential until the wedding day. No social media, no telling friends, nobody, except your fiancé. The moment this leaks, I'm out." I nodded frantically. "Of course, absolutely." "Second, I'm not doing this for publicity or photos or any kind of media attention. This is between us, understood?" "Completely understood." "Third, and this is non-negotiable, if your father doesn't show up to the wedding, we call it off. I'm not walking you down an aisle to spite anyone. This only works if he's there to see it." That last condition hit me like cold water. But what if he doesn't come? He said I was dead to him. He might not even know about the wedding. "Then you'd better figure out a way to get him there without telling him why." Ford stood up, extending his hand again. "Do we have a deal, Ms. Martinez?" I shook his hand, feeling like I was sealing a pact with destiny itself.
The drive home passed in a blur of disbelief and panic. How was I supposed to get Dad to the wedding without revealing the surprise? He'd made it crystal clear he wanted nothing to do with my marriage to David. David was waiting in the kitchen when I burst through the front door, practically vibrating with excitement. How did it go? Please tell me you didn't embarrass yourself in front of Indiana Jones. He said yes.
David's coffee mug slipped from his hands, shattering against the tile floor. He said, "What now?" "Harrison Ford is going to walk me down the aisle at our wedding." Holy! David sat down heavily in the nearest chair. This is actually happening. Harrison Ford? At our wedding? But there's a catch. I explained Ford's conditions, watching David's expression shift from elation to concern. "So we need your dad there, but we can't tell him why he needs to be there?" "Exactly, and we have 6 weeks to figure it out." Over the next few days, I wrestled with different strategies. Direct invitation was out. Dad had made his position clear. Asking Mom to convince him felt like putting her in an impossible situation. Marcus might help, but Dad would be suspicious if my brother suddenly started pushing for wedding attendance. The answer came from an unexpected source. I was grading papers one afternoon when my phone rang. Janet from Mom's book club. "Rachel, dear, I hope you don't mind me calling. Your mother mentioned you were having trouble with your father and the wedding." I tensed, wondering how much Mom had shared. "It's complicated, Janet." "Family always is. But I had a thought. You know I volunteer at the Veterans Community Center downtown, right? Well, we're hosting an event the Saturday before your wedding, a memorial service for recently passed members. Your father served with several of these men." My pulse quickened. "Go on." "What if I mentioned to him that you'd specifically requested his attendance? Not for the wedding, mind you, but for the memorial, a chance to honor his fallen brothers. And then, well, if he happened to realize your wedding was the next day." It was perfect. Dad's military service had always been sacred to him, something that transcended even his current anger. He'd never miss honoring fallen comrades, especially if he thought I'd specifically asked him to be there. "Janet, you're brilliant." "I have my moments, dear. I'll make the call this evening." 2 days later, Mom called with barely contained excitement. "He's coming to the memorial service. Janet worked her magic. Apparently, you specifically requested his presence to help honor Sergeant Rodriguez and Lieutenant Murphy." I've never heard those names in my life. "Neither has your father, but they served in Desert Storm around the same time he did." Janet's very thorough with her research. The memorial service was scheduled for Saturday, October 14th, exactly 24 hours before my wedding. Perfect timing if everything went according to plan. Meanwhile, coordinating with Harrison Ford's team proved more complex than I'd anticipated. His assistant, Sarah, called weekly with updates and requirements, security protocols, arrival times, exit strategies. Apparently, even surprise wedding appearances required military-level planning. "Mr. Ford will arrive at the venue at 3:15 p.m., Sarah explained during our final planning call. "He'll enter through the service entrance to avoid any early arriving guests. You'll have 5 minutes to brief him on any last-minute details, then he'll wait in the designated area until the ceremony begins." What if someone recognizes him before the ceremony? That's why we're using the service entrance and timing everything precisely. The fewer people who see him beforehand, the better. 3 weeks before the wedding, I faced another challenge, keeping the secret from my own wedding party. My maid of honor, Jessica, had been my college roommate and possessed an uncanny ability to detect when I was hiding something. "You're being weird," she announced over brunch at our favorite cafe. "Like, weirder than normal pre-wedding jitters. What's going on?" "Just nervous about Dad not being there." Jessica studied my face with the intensity of a detective. "No, that's not it. You've got that same look you had freshman year when you were planning to surprise me with concert tickets. You're plotting something." I forced myself to meet her gaze steadily. "I'm not plotting anything. I'm just trying to make sure everything goes smoothly." "Uh-huh." She didn't believe me for a second, but thankfully dropped the subject. The biggest test came during our final dress fitting, 2 weeks before the wedding.
Mom, Jessica, and my future sister-in-law Emma had all come along for moral support and champagne. As I stood on the fitting platform in my flowing white gown, Emma asked the question I'd been dreading. "So, who's walking you down the aisle? Have you decided?" The room went quiet. Mom busied herself adjusting my veil, while Jessica looked at me expectantly. "It's handled," I said carefully. "Everything's arranged." "But who?" Emma pressed. "Marcus, your mom?" "Someone special," I replied, then quickly changed the subject to bouquet flowers. Later, as we left the bridal shop, Mom pulled me aside. "You're up to something, aren't you?" "Why does everyone keep saying that?" "Because I know that look. It's the same expression you had at age 8 when you convinced the entire neighborhood that you taught your hamster to do algebra." Mr. Whiskers was very talented.
Mr. Whiskers hid peanuts in his cheek pouches, and you pretended they were his answers to math problems. Mom smiled softly. Just promise me that whatever you're planning, it won't make things worse with your father. I promise, Mom. Trust me. The weekend of the memorial service arrived with typical Arizona October weather, clear skies and perfect 75 degrees. I dressed carefully in a navy blue dress, appropriate for honoring fallen veterans while still looking like someone who belonged at such an event. The Veterans Community Center was packed with older men in their dress uniforms, some walking with canes, others in wheelchairs, all carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of career military. I spotted Dad immediately near the front, his own dress uniform crisp and perfectly pressed. He saw me approach and his expression hardened, but he couldn't leave without seeming disrespectful to the ceremony about to begin. "Rachel," his voice was coldly polite. "Dad, thank you for coming. It means a lot that you're here to honor these men. It's my duty, nothing more." The ceremony was beautiful and heartbreaking. As different veterans spoke about their fallen comrades, I watched Dad's face soften with grief and pride. This was the man I remembered, someone who understood honor, sacrifice, and the bonds that transcended individual disagreements. When the formal ceremony ended, I found my moment as Dad stood to leave. "Dad, I know you don't want to hear this, but my wedding is tomorrow, 4 o'clock at Desert Botanical Garden. I'm not asking you to walk me down the aisle or give a speech or pretend everything's fine between us, but if there's any part of the man who raised me still in there, if there's any love left for the daughter who worships you despite everything, please come." He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw working silently. "I meant what I said, Rachel. You made your choice." "And you made yours. But tomorrow isn't about our choices, Dad. It's about David and me starting our lives together. You don't have to approve, but I need you there. Not for me, for the little girl who used to watch Indiana Jones movies with her dad every Friday night." I left him standing there and walked away, my heart breaking all over again. But I'd done everything I could. The rest was up to him. I woke up on my wedding day to the sound of rain against my bedroom window. In Phoenix, in October, the weather forecast had promised nothing but sunshine for weeks, and now, on the one day I needed everything to be perfect, Mother Nature decided to play a cruel joke. "This is a sign," I muttered, pulling a pillow over my head. "The universe is telling me this whole plan is insane." My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, Harrison Ford's assistant. "Weather update received. Mr. Ford's team is prepared for indoor-outdoor contingencies. Venue has covered areas. Proceed as planned." Leave it to Harrison Ford's people to have backup plans for backup plans. I dragged myself out of bed and peered through the blinds. The rain was light but steady, turning the usually bone-dry desert into something resembling actual nature. By 9 a.m., the rain had stopped, leaving behind that rare Phoenix phenomenon, humidity. The desert air actually felt alive instead of sucking the moisture from everything it touched. Maybe it wasn't such a bad omen after all. Mom arrived at my apartment with coffee, bagels, and barely contained anxiety. "Any word from your father?" she asked, setting up breakfast on my kitchen counter. "Nothing, but that doesn't mean anything.
You know, Dad, he makes decisions and sticks to them, whether they're right or wrong. He'll come. Mom's voice carried more hope than conviction. He has to. Jessica arrived at 10 with the makeup artist and hairstylist, transforming my apartment into a pre-wedding command center. As various beauty professionals worked their magic, I tried to focus on anything except the massive gamble I'd made. Either this would be the most romantic gesture in wedding history, or I'd have to explain to 150 guests why Harrison Ford had randomly showed up to walk a complete stranger down the aisle. "Your skin is glowing today," the makeup artist commented. "Must be those pre-mudding endorphins." If only she knew, it was actually pre-wedding terror mixed with the kind of adrenaline usually reserved for base jumping. At noon, David texted from his groomsmen preparation session. "Any last-minute panic attacks I should know about?" I typed back, "Just the usual bride stuff. See you at the altar." That was the understatement of the century. Sarah called at 1 p.m. with final logistics. "Mr. Ford is en route to the venue. The security team is already in position. Are you ready for this?" As ready as someone can be for something completely unprecedented. "Good. Remember, if your father isn't there by 3:45, we abort. Mr. Ford will quietly leave, and you proceed with your original plans." Original plans? As if I'd had any clue what those were anymore. The Desert Botanical Garden was stunning, despite the earlier rain, or maybe because of it. The desert plants seemed more vibrant, the air cleaner, the late afternoon light softer than usual. Our ceremony was set in the garden's amphitheater, surrounded by towering saguaro cacti and colorful desert wildflowers. I arrived at the venue at 2:30, my heart hammering as I scanned the growing crowd of guests. No sign of Dad yet, but plenty of David's extended family who'd flown in from Seattle, my teacher colleagues, college friends, and neighbors who'd become like family over the years. "Breathe," Jessica commanded, adjusting my dress in the bridal suite. "You look absolutely gorgeous. Everything is perfect, and in 2 hours, you'll be married to the love of your life." Emma poked her head through the door. "The guys are ready when you are. David looks nervous but happy." At 3:15, I received the text I'd been waiting for. "Package delivered, awaiting further instructions." That was code for Harrison Ford's arrival. My phone immediately rang. "Miss Martinez, this is Sarah. Mr. Ford is in position, but we have a problem. There are more guests than anticipated, and several have recognized him despite our precautions." My stomach dropped. What kind of problem? "Nothing major yet, but there's definitely some chatter. A few people have taken discreet photos. We can still proceed, but the surprise element may be compromised." I closed my eyes, weighing options I'd never considered. Is he okay with continuing? He says it's your call. He's committed to seeing this through if you want to proceed. At 3:40, with still no sign of Dad, I was ready to call the whole thing off. This had been a beautiful, crazy dream, but reality was setting in. Maybe some fairy tales weren't meant to come true. Then Mom burst into the bridal suite, her face flushed and eyes bright with tears. "He's here," she whispered. "Your father just pulled into the parking lot." The relief nearly knocked me over. "Are you sure?" "I watched him get out of his car. He's wearing his good suit, the navy one from your college graduation. He's walking toward the entrance right now." Jessica squeezed my hand. "This is it, Rachel. Whatever you've been planning, now's the time." I took a deep breath and texted Sarah. "Green light, we're going." The response came immediately. "Copy that. Mr. Ford is moving into position." The next 15 minutes passed in a blur of final preparations. Touch-up powder, a spritz of perfume, one last adjustment to my veil. Through the suite window, I could see guests taking their seats. David standing at the altar looking devastatingly handsome in his charcoal gray tuxedo. And there, in the third row on the left side, sat my father. His face was stone, his posture rigid, but he was there. He'd actually come. At 3:58, Sarah appeared at the suite door. "Time to go, Miss Martinez. Are you ready?" I looked at myself in the full-length mirror one last time. The woman staring back barely resembled the heartbroken daughter who'd been disowned 6 months earlier. This woman looked strong, radiant, and absolutely certain of what she was about to do. I'm ready. The walk from the bridal suite to the ceremony staging area felt like a mile. Sarah led me along a side path hidden from guest view, past towering barrel cacti and blooming Palo Verde trees. Finally, we reached a small alcove behind the amphitheater, where Harrison Ford waited. He looked exactly like himself, which sounds obvious, but felt surreal in the context of my wedding day. The man from countless movies, the face I'd grown up seeing on Dad's posters, standing in a desert garden wearing a perfectly tailored black suit and waiting to walk me down the aisle. "Mr. Ford," he said, with that familiar slight smile, "you look beautiful. Ready to shock your father?" "Mr. Ford, I can't thank you enough for this. It's beyond anything I could have imagined." "Save the thanks for after we see if this crazy plan actually works." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" The music started. Pachelbel's Canon in D, the same piece that had played at my parents' wedding 28 years earlier. Through the alcove opening, I could see guests rising to their feet, turning toward the back of the amphitheater where they expected to see me appear. But I wasn't coming from the back. We were entering from the side, where no one would see us until we were already halfway down the aisle. "On three," Sarah whispered into her headset. "1, 2, 3." Harrison Ford and I stepped into view. The reaction was immediate and electric. Gasps, whispers, a few stifled shrieks from movie fans in the crowd. I caught sight of Jessica's face, her mouth hanging open in complete shock. Emma actually stumbled backward into her husband. David's groomsmen were staring like they'd seen a mirage. But I only had eyes for two people. David, whose expression shifted from confusion to amazement to pure joy, and Dad. My father's face went through a transformation I'll never forget. First, the usual stoic mask he'd worn for months, then confusion as he processed what he was seeing, then recognition, not just of Harrison Ford, but of what this moment meant. His daughter, the one he'd declared dead to him, had somehow convinced his greatest hero to walk her down the aisle. The stone facade cracked, his eyes filled with tears he tried desperately to hide. As we processed down the aisle, Harrison Ford leaned over and whispered, "I think your plan is working."
Dad had risen with the rest of the guests, but he remained standing even as others began to sit back down. His gaze was locked on mine, and for the first time in 6 months, I saw my real father looking back at me. Not the angry, frightened man who disowned me, but the dad who'd taught me that sometimes the impossible just takes a little more effort. Harrison Ford and I reached the altar as the music swelled around us. The entire amphitheater buzzed with whispered conversations and the subtle sound of phone cameras clicking, despite the unplugged ceremony signs posted everywhere. David stood waiting with tears in his eyes and the biggest smile I'd ever seen on his face. The officiant, Pastor Williams from the local community church, looked slightly bewildered but maintained his professional composure. He'd married hundreds of couples over his 30-year career, but this was clearly a first for him, too. "Who gives this woman to be married?" Pastor Williams asked, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. Harrison Ford looked down at me, then out at the assembled guests, and finally his gaze settled on my father. "Her father does," he said clearly, "and I'm honored to stand in his place until he's ready to give his blessing himself." The words hit the crowd like lightning. This wasn't just a celebrity cameo. This was a deliberate message to my dad. Ford gently lifted my hand from his arm and placed it in David's. But instead of immediately taking his seat, he did something completely unexpected. He walked directly to where Dad stood frozen in the third row. The entire wedding party, all 150 guests, and probably several security cameras, watched as Harrison Ford extended his hand to my father. The silence was so complete, I could hear birds singing in the desert plants surrounding us. "Tom Martinez," Ford said, his voice carrying just enough to reach the first few rows. Your daughter talks about you constantly. She's proud to be your daughter, even when you're too stubborn to be proud of her. Dad stared at the outstretched hand for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then, slowly, he reached out and shook it. Mr. Ford, Dad's voice cracked slightly. I didn't expect, I never thought. She loves you, Tom. That's why I'm here. Not for the cameras or the story, but because your daughter refused to give up on you. Ford's voice softened. I've got a daughter too. If she went to this much trouble to show me I was wrong, I'd hope I'd be smart enough to listen. Ford returned to the altar area, but remained standing off to the side rather than taking a seat. Pastor Williams cleared his throat and began the ceremony, but everyone's attention kept drifting between David and me exchanging vows and the unprecedented drama unfolding in the third row. David, I began my vows, my voice steady despite the emotional chaos of the last few minutes. 6 months ago, I thought my world was falling apart. My family was broken, my father had turned his back on me, and I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. Then you walked into that coffee shop and ordered the worst drink on the menu with complete confidence, and somehow that ridiculous choice made me believe in second chances again. David laughed, wiping away tears. It was a pumpkin spice latte in July. I stand by that choice. You taught me that love doesn't divide, it multiplies. Loving you doesn't make me love my family less. It makes me love everything more deeply, more fully, more bravely. You've shown me that sometimes the best way to honor where you come from is to choose where you're going. I glanced toward Dad, who was now openly crying despite his best efforts to maintain composure. David Chen, I promise to choose you every day, to choose us, to choose the family we're building together while never forgetting the families that made us who we are. I promise to love you through every season, every challenge, every terrible coffee order you make for the rest of our lives. David's vows were equally emotional. Rachel, you are the strongest person I know. You fight for what you believe in, you stand up for people you love, and you never give up on anyone, even when they've given up on themselves. You've taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's loving someone so much that you're willing to be afraid if it means protecting them. He looked directly at Dad. Mr. Martinez, I know you don't know me yet, but I want you to know that I see Rachel exactly the way you raised her to see herself, as someone worth fighting for. I promise to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of the extraordinary woman you helped create. Dad's composure finally cracked completely. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs that he could no longer hide. Mom, sitting beside him, wrapped her arm around his shoulders and whispered something I couldn't hear, but I saw him nod and squeeze her hand. Pastor Williams guided us through the ring exchange, the unity candle lighting, and all the traditional elements of the ceremony, but the real focus remained on the family healing happening in real time before our eyes. When Pastor Williams finally pronounced us husband and wife, David kissed me with such joy and relief that we both started laughing through our tears. The crowd erupted in applause, but I was watching Dad, who had stood again and was clapping harder than anyone else. As we turned to walk back down the aisle as a married couple, Harrison Ford stepped forward one more time. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Chen, he said formally, then leaned closer and added with a wink, I think your father wants to talk to you. Indeed, Dad had left his row and was walking toward us, his face a mixture of shame, love, and desperate hope. David squeezed my hand and whispered, Go talk to him. I'll handle the receiving line. I met Dad halfway up the aisle, vaguely aware that our entire wedding reception was watching this reunion unfold. Daddy, I whispered, using the name I hadn't called him since childhood. Rachel, he struggled for words, then pulled me into a hug so fierce it lifted me off my feet. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I was wrong about everything. About David, about you, about what family means. I held him tight, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the desert air. I know, Dad. I know. How did you— Harrison Ford, how did you even think of that? I pulled back to look at his face, both of us crying openly now. Because you taught me that sometimes impossible things are just difficult things that nobody's tried hard enough to achieve yet. You taught me to never give up on people I love. I hurt you so badly. I said terrible things. You were scared. People say things they don't mean when they're scared. But I did mean them. At that moment, I meant every word. That's what makes this so much worse. I cupped his face in my hands, the same way he used to do when I was little and needed comfort. Dad, you also taught me that people can change, that admitting you're wrong takes more courage than being right. You're here. That's what matters. Behind us, I could hear David graciously explaining to confused guests that we'd be starting the cocktail hour in a few minutes, giving everyone time to process what they'd just witnessed. I want to get to know him, Dad said suddenly. David, I want to know the man my daughter fell in love with. I want to understand what you see in him. You will. And Dad, he's going to love you. He already does, just because you're part of me. We walked together toward where David was standing with the wedding party, Harrison Ford having quietly disappeared somewhere in the controlled chaos of post-ceremony mingling. David, Dad said, extending his hand, I owe you an apology. I owe you a conversation. And if you're willing, I'd like to get to know my new son-in-law. David shook Dad's hand firmly. Mr. Martinez, I'd be honored. And sir, thank you for raising such an incredible woman. I know now where she gets her determination from. Mom appeared at Dad's elbow, tears streaming down her face, but smiling wider than I'd seen her smile since before the divorce announcement. Well, she said, looking around at our reunited family, this is certainly going to be a wedding reception to remember. The cocktail hour buzzed with an energy I'd never experienced at any wedding. Guests clustered in small groups, their conversations a mix of genuine celebration and barely contained excitement about what they'd just witnessed. Is that really Harrison Ford? I overheard my Aunt Susan whisper to my cousin Mike. Did he just lecture Rachel's dad in the middle of the ceremony? Came from one of David's college friends. How does someone even arrange something like this? Wondered Mrs. Henderson from down the street. I moved through the crowd in my wedding dress, accepting congratulations and deflecting questions with practiced grace. David worked the other side of the reception area, his natural charm helping guests transition from shock back to celebration mode. But I kept one eye on the most important conversation happening near the Desert Gardens fountain. Dad and David stood together, awkward but earnest, while Mom hovered nearby like a protective mother hen. This was the conversation I dreamed about for months, my father actually talking to my husband as human beings instead of adversaries. So you're a graphic designer, Dad was saying, his tone carefully neutral. What kind of work do you do? Mostly corporate branding, some website design. I've been working on a project for the Children's Hospital, creating a more welcoming visual identity for their pediatric wing. David's voice held steady, despite the obvious tension. Rachel actually gave me the idea. She talks about her students constantly, how important it is for kids to feel safe and welcomed in new environments. I saw Dad's posture shift slightly, still guarded, but genuinely listening now. She's always been good with kids, Dad admitted. Even as a teenager, she volunteered at the church nursery, said she wanted to make sure every child felt special. That's exactly what drew me to her, David replied. The way she talks about her students, you can tell she sees something unique in each one. It's the same way she talks about you. Dad's eyebrows rose. She talks about me? Constantly. Even after. David paused diplomatically. Even during the difficult months. She'd tell me stories about learning to throw a football in your backyard, about Friday movie nights, about how you taught her to change a tire when she was 16 because you wanted her to be self-sufficient. I watched Dad's face soften as David continued. She worships you, Mr. Martinez. That's why today was so important to her. She didn't want to hurt you or prove you wrong. She just wanted her father back. Before Dad could respond, a commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. Harrison Ford was leaving, flanked by his security team, trying to slip out quietly. But several guests had noticed and were angling for photos or autographs. I hurried over, David close behind me. "Mr. Ford, you're leaving already?" He smiled that familiar half-smile. "Mission accomplished, Mrs. Chen. Time for me to disappear before this turns into a circus." He glanced toward where Dad stood. "Looks like your plan worked." "I can never thank you enough for this." "Thank you for being happy. And maybe send me a Christmas card in a few years with pictures of those kids you'll have. I'd like to know how the story ends." As Ford and his team headed toward their waiting vehicles, Dad approached us. For a moment, the three of us stood together, father, daughter, and the movie star who'd helped bridge the gap between us. "Mr. Ford," Dad said quietly, "thank you, not just for today, but for what you said during the ceremony. I needed to hear it." Ford studied Dad's face carefully. "Your daughter never gave up on you, Tom. Don't give up on yourself." He shook Dad's hand one final time. "Take care of your family." With that, Harrison Ford walked out of our wedding and back to his regular life, leaving behind a family that was finally whole again. The reception dinner proceeded with surprising normalcy considering the extraordinary circumstances. Dad gave a toast that had everyone in tears. "6 months ago, I thought I knew what was best for my daughter," he began, his voice carrying across the silent dining area. "I thought love meant protecting her from making what I saw as a mistake. But Rachel taught me something today. Love isn't about controlling someone's choices. It's about supporting them even when you don't understand those choices." He looked directly at David. "Son, I was wrong about you before I even met you. I let fear and prejudice cloud my judgment. But watching you today, seeing how you looked at my daughter during your vows, hearing how you talk about her, I can see that you love her the way she deserves to be loved." Dad's voice cracked slightly. "Rachel, you are the bravest person I know. You fought for your happiness, you fought for your marriage, and most importantly, you fought for our family. You never gave up on your old man, even when I'd given up on myself. I'm proud to be your father, and I'm proud to welcome David into our family." The applause was thunderous, but I was focused on the tears streaming down Mom's face and the genuine smile on David. Later, during the dancing portion of the evening, Dad approached me as I swayed with David to our first dance song. "May I cut in?" he asked formally. David graciously stepped aside, and suddenly I was in my father's arms for the first time in months, dancing to the same song that had played at my parents' wedding decades earlier. "I missed you so much, Daddy," I whispered against his shoulder. "I missed you too, sweetheart. Every single day." He pulled back to look at me. "Can you forgive a foolish old man for nearly missing the most important day of his daughter's life?" "There's nothing to forgive. You're here now. That's what matters." "How did you know?" he asked as we swayed together. "How did you know that bringing Harrison Ford would change my mind?" I smiled, remembering all those Friday nights watching movies together. "Because you taught me that heroes aren't the people who never make mistakes. Heroes are the people who find the courage to make things right when they mess up. I knew that if anyone could remind you who you really are, it would be the man whose characters taught you that lesson in the first place." Dad laughed through his tears. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from the best." As the song ended, David appeared at my side again, and Dad graciously handed me back to my husband. "Take good care of her," Dad told David. "Always," David promised. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dancing, laughter, and the kind of joy that comes from families healing old wounds. Guests gradually began to leave, but our immediate family lingered in the garden, reluctant to let the magic of the day end. "So what happens now?" Mom asked as we sat together at a table covered in the remnants of wedding cake and scattered rose petals. "Now we start over," Dad said simply. "All of us. We remember what family really means." David reached for my hand. "And we build something new while honoring everything that came before." I looked around at the faces of the people I loved most, my new husband, my reunited parents, my brother who'd flown in from Denver to witness this miracle. 6 months ago, I thought I was choosing between my family and my future. Instead, I'd found a way to choose both. "Now," I said, squeezing David's hand and smiling at Dad, "we live happily ever after." just like in the movies. 3 years later, I stood in the kitchen of our new house in Tempe, watching through the window as Dad taught our 18-month-old daughter, Emma, how to water the tomato plants in our backyard garden. She toddled around in her tiny overalls, more interested in splashing in the puddles than actually watering anything, while Dad patiently redirected the hose toward the plants. "Your grandfather is going to turn our daughter into a gardening prodigy," David said, wrapping his arms around me from behind as he joined me at the window. "Better than his previous hobby of holding grudges," I replied, leaning back against his chest. The transformation in our family over those 3 years had been nothing short of miraculous. Dad had kept his promise to get to know David, and their relationship had evolved from awkward politeness to genuine friendship. They bonded over unexpected common interests. Both were obsessed with perfectly maintained lawns, both could spend hours debating the merits of different power tools, and both shared an inexplicable love for terrible action movies from the 1980s. Mom and Dad had even reconciled, though they'd chosen to remain divorced. "We're better as friends," Mom had explained. The divorce wasn't about not loving each other, it was about learning to love each other differently. They now lived in separate apartments in the same complex, had dinner together twice a week, and tag-teamed babysitting duties with the enthusiasm of people making up for lost time. The doorbell rang, interrupting my reflection. David went to answer it while I continued watching Dad chase Emma around the garden, both of them giggling like conspirators. "Rachel," David called from the front door, "you need to see this." I found him standing on our front porch holding a large envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note on elegant stationery and a small wrapped package. The note read, "Congratulations on your daughter. I told you I wanted to know how the story ends. Looks like it's just the beginning. HF." Inside the package was a small vintage Indiana Jones action figure, still in its original 1980s packaging, along with another note. "For Emma's toy box. Every little girl needs a hero." "He remembered," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. After 3 years, he actually remembered. David grinned. "Should we tell Emma that Han Solo sent her a present, or wait until she's old enough to appreciate the full story?" Before I could answer, Dad appeared in the doorway, Emma perched on his hip, both of them covered in dirt and grinning from ear to ear. "What's all the excitement about?" Dad asked. I showed him the note and the action figure. His face went through the same transformation I'd seen at our wedding: confusion, recognition, then pure amazement. "Harrison Ford sent our granddaughter a present," he said, slowly, as if testing the words to make sure they were real. "Apparently, our story made quite an impression on him." Dad bounced Emma gently, making her squeal with delight. "Did you hear that, Princess? You got a present from Indiana Jones himself." Emma, being 18 months old, was more interested in trying to eat the wrapping paper, but Dad was enchanted by the whole thing. Later that evening, after Emma was in bed and David was grading papers at the dining room table, Dad and I sat on the back porch with glasses of iced tea, watching the sunset paint the Phoenix sky in shades of orange and pink. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked quietly. "The wedding, I mean." "Every day. Not because I'm dwelling on the past, but because it changed everything for the better." Dad was quiet for a long moment. "I nearly destroyed our family because I was terrified of change. I thought if I could control your choices, I could protect you from making mistakes. But the biggest mistake was almost losing you." "Dad, we've talked about this. The past is—" "No, let me finish." He turned to face me fully. "That day, when Harrison Ford walked you down that aisle, it wasn't just about proving a point or getting my attention. You were showing me what unconditional love actually looks like. You loved me enough to fight for me, even when I'd given you every reason to give up." I felt tears starting again. Even after 3 years, this conversation could still overwhelm me with emotion. "You taught me that love isn't about agreeing with someone's choices," Dad continued. "It's about loving them regardless of their choices. David has been nothing but good to you, good for you, and good to our family.
I was wrong about him, wrong about your relationship, wrong about what marriage and family should look like. You weren't wrong about everything, Dad. You taught me to fight for what I believe in. You taught me that family is worth fighting for. That's exactly what I was doing. Dad smiled, the same smile I remembered from childhood. You know what the best part is? Emma will grow up knowing her grandfather as someone who learned to admit when he was wrong, someone who chose love over pride. That's the legacy I want to leave her. Through the sliding glass door, we could see David at the dining room table, red pen in hand, carefully reviewing his students' design projects with the same attention and care he brought to everything in his life. Emma's baby monitor crackled softly from the kitchen counter, broadcasting the gentle sounds of our daughter sleeping peacefully in her crib. I have something for you, Dad said suddenly, reaching into his shirt pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box and handed it to me. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant, a tiny replica of the Harrison Ford autograph from his prized movie poster. I had it made by a jeweler downtown, Dad explained. It's not the original autograph, obviously, but it's a reminder of the day everything changed. The day my daughter taught me what real courage looks like. I clasped the necklace around my neck, the small pendant settling perfectly at my collarbone. Dad, it's beautiful. I want you to wear it on Emma's wedding day, he said with a grin, assuming, of course, that I live long enough to walk her down the aisle myself. Oh, you'll be there, and you'll probably cry even harder than you did at mine. Probably, Dad chuckled, though hopefully her wedding will be slightly less dramatic. I'm not sure my heart could handle another surprise like that.
We sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the desert sky. 3 years ago, I'd thought I was planning a wedding. I had no idea I was actually orchestrating a family reunion, a reconciliation, and the beginning of the next chapter of all our lives. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, who was now planning her own wedding and constantly asking for advice. Quick question, do you think it's too crazy to have my ceremony at sunrise? I want it to be memorable. I typed back, crazy is relative. Follow your heart. The best stories come from the biggest risks. As I sent the text, I thought about all the people who'd played a part in our story. Mom, who'd never stopped believing Dad would come around. Marcus, who'd flown in from Denver without question. Janet, whose strategic planning had gotten Dad to the wedding. Kelly, who'd made the impossible connection. And of course, Harrison Ford, who'd seen something in our story worth supporting. But mostly I thought about the lesson that had emerged from all of it. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to give up on people, especially when they've given up on themselves. David appeared in the doorway, finished with his grading, ready to come inside. Emma might wake up soon because of her late feeding. I stood and hugged Dad goodnight. Thanks for the necklace, and thanks for being the father I always knew you could be. Thanks for never letting me be less than that, he replied. As we walked into our house, our home filled with love, laughter, and second chances, I touched the small pendant at my throat and smiled. Some fairy tales, it turns out, are worth fighting for, and the best ones don't end with happily ever after. They end with, and the adventure continues. Outside, the desert night settled over Phoenix, peaceful and full of promise for whatever tomorrow might bring. 5 years had passed since Harrison Ford walked me down the aisle, and life had settled into a rhythm I never could have imagined during those dark months when Dad and I weren't speaking. But as I stood in the Phoenix Children's Hospital, watching my 4-year-old daughter Emma color pictures with pediatric patients, I realized our story was still being written in ways I'd never expected. Emma had Dad's stubborn streak and David's gentle nature, combined with an innate ability to make friends with absolutely everyone she met. Today, she was part of a special program David had developed, art therapy sessions, where volunteer families brought creative activities to young patients stuck in the hospital for extended stays. "Mommy, look!" Emma held up a drawing she'd made with 7-year-old Marcus, a boy undergoing cancer treatment. The picture showed stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, with "Friends Forever" written in crayon across the top. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, my heart swelling as I watched her carefully tear the paper in half, giving Marcus one piece while keeping the other. Even at 4, she understood the importance of sharing joy. David appeared beside me, his camera in hand. He'd been documenting these sessions for a presentation to the hospital board, hoping to expand the program to other medical facilities across Arizona. "She's got your gift for connecting with people," he said, snapping a photo of Emma teaching another child how to fold origami cranes. "And your creative spirit. Look at that concentration." We'd been married for 8 years now, and David still had the ability to surprise me with his depth and compassion. The art therapy program had been his idea, born from watching how naturally Emma interacted with children during our regular hospital visits to see one of my former students who'd been diagnosed with leukemia. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Turn on Channel 12 News at 5 p.m. You'll want to see this." I frowned, showing David the message. "Any idea what that's about?" "None, but your mom has that mysterious tone. Should we be worried?" Before I could speculate further, Dad appeared in the hospital playroom doorway, still wearing his work clothes from the construction site where he'd been employed as a project supervisor for the past 2 years. His face was flushed with excitement and something that looked suspiciously like pride. "There you are," he called out, causing several small heads to turn in his direction. Emma immediately abandoned her art project and ran to him. "Grandpa, you're early." "I had to leave work to see this," he said, scooping her up and spinning her around. "My granddaughter is going to be on television." "What are you talking about?" I asked, completely confused. Dad set Emma down and pulled out his phone, showing us a news website article with the headline, "Local Family's Hospital Art Program Catches Hollywood's Attention." My breath caught as I read the first paragraph. A children's art therapy program started by Phoenix residents David and Rachel Chen has received unexpected support from actor Harrison Ford, who participated in the couple's wedding several years ago. Ford's foundation has donated $50,000 to expand the program statewide, citing the family's ongoing commitment to community service as inspiration for the gift. "How did they even know about the program?" David asked, reading over my shoulder. Dad's grin widened. "Remember that Christmas card you sent to Harrison Ford 3 years ago? The one with Emma's picture?" I nodded slowly. After receiving the Indiana Jones action figure, I'd started sending Ford annual Christmas cards with family updates, never expecting responses, but wanting to honor his request to know how our story continued. "Well, apparently he's been following your lives more closely than you realized. Kelly, you remember Janet's daughter who helped arrange the original meeting? She called me this morning. Ford saw an article about David's program in some hospital newsletter and recognized your names. He contacted his foundation immediately." The implications hit me like a wave. He's been watching our family for 8 years? "Not watching," Dad corrected. "Caring. There's a difference." That evening, we gathered at Mom and Dad's shared apartment complex. They'd finally moved into side-by-side units the previous year. The entire extended family was there. Marcus had flown in from Denver with his wife and twin boys, David's parents had driven down from Flagstaff where they'd retired, and even Jessica had come with her husband and baby daughter. The news story was more comprehensive than I'd expected. It featured interviews with hospital staff, footage of Emma and other volunteer children working with patients, and a brief segment about David's background in therapeutic design. But the real surprise came at the end. The reporter announced, Mr. Ford was unable to appear for an on-camera interview, but he provided this statement. "The Chen family represents the best of what community involvement can accomplish. Their wedding day showed me the power of fighting for family. Their ongoing work with hospitalized children shows the importance of fighting for community. I'm honored to support their efforts to bring healing through art." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Emma, not entirely understanding why everyone was celebrating, clapped along enthusiastically from her perch on Dad's lap. "Can someone please explain to me how our family became connected to Han Solo?" asked Marcus's wife Sarah, who'd only heard abbreviated versions of our wedding story over the years. "It's a long story," I said, settling onto the couch next to David. "The best stories usually are," replied David's mother, Helen, "and I have a feeling this one isn't over yet." She was right, of course. 2 weeks later, we received an invitation that left us all speechless. Harrison Ford's production company was hosting a charity gala in Los Angeles to benefit children's hospitals nationwide, and they wanted David and me to speak about the art therapy program. I can't speak at a Hollywood gala, I protested to David as we stared at the elegant invitation. I'm an elementary school teacher from Phoenix. You're also someone who convinced Harrison Ford to walk down a wedding aisle, started a hospital program that's helping sick children, and raised a daughter who thinks everyone deserves to be her friend. I'd say you're qualified. The gala was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Held at a Beverly Hills hotel, it brought together celebrities, medical professionals, philanthropists, and families like ours who'd been touched by childhood illness. Emma, now old enough to appreciate the significance, wore a beautiful navy dress and clutched her original Indiana Jones action figure like a talisman. When Harrison Ford took the stage to introduce us, the surreal nature of our 8-year journey hit me full force. 8 years ago, he began, I walked a young woman down the aisle at her wedding. It was supposed to be a one-time favor, a way to help heal a family rift. But Rachel and David Chen taught me something that night about the ripple effects of small acts of kindness. Their marriage didn't just reunite a family, it created a family committed to serving others. The spotlight found us in the audience, and I felt David's hand squeeze mine as Ford continued. The art therapy program they've built serves over 200 children annually. It's been replicated in 4 states and has directly influenced policy changes in pediatric care standards. But more importantly, it represents what happens when people choose love over fear, community over isolation, and hope over cynicism. After our presentation, Ford approached us privately in a quiet corner of the hotel's garden terrace. How does it feel to know you've changed hundreds of lives? He asked Emma, crouching down to her level. Good, she replied with 4-year-old simplicity. Grandpa says helping people makes your heart bigger. Ford laughed, the same genuine laugh I remembered from our first meeting. Your grandfather is a wise man. He wasn't always, but he learned to be. That's what makes him special. He stood and looked at David and me. You know, when I agreed to walk you down that aisle, I thought I was doing you a favor. Turns out, you were doing me one. Watching your family over these years, seeing how you've built something meaningful together, it's reminded me what really matters. Thank you, I said simply, for everything. Not just the wedding, not just tonight, but for believing in our story before we even knew what it was. Stories like yours give the rest of us hope, Ford replied. They remind us that sometimes the impossible is just the possible waiting for someone brave enough to try. As we flew home to Phoenix the next morning, Emma asleep against David's shoulder and the city sprawling beneath us in the morning light, I thought about all the unexpected chapters our story had written itself. Dad met us at the airport, his face bright with pride and joy. The angry, fearful man who disowned me almost a decade earlier had been replaced by someone I barely recognized, someone softer, wiser, more open to the beautiful complications of love and family. How did it go? He asked as Emma ran to hug him. Better than we ever imagined, David replied. Emma charmed everyone, Rachel gave an incredible speech, and Harrison Ford told the whole audience that our family inspired him. Dad shook his head in amazement. From a broken engagement to inspiring movie stars, only you, Rachel, only you could turn a family crisis into a Hollywood ending. It's not an ending, Dad, I said, watching Emma chatter excitedly about leading real movie people. It's just another beginning. As we walked through the airport together, 4 generations of family united by love, forgiveness, and the courage to fight for each other, I touched the small pendant at my throat that Dad had given me years earlier. Some stories, I realized, don't have endings at all. They just keep growing, spreading outward like ripples on water, touching lives in ways you never expected. Emma's laughter echoed through the terminal as Dad swooped her up onto his shoulders, and I knew that whatever came next in our story, it would be written with the same love, determination, and hope that had brought us this far. After all, the best fairy tales aren't about living happily ever after. They're about choosing to write a happy ending every single day. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.